It now gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Stephen Bulla. Steve is a world-renowned composer, arranger and salvationist. Steve currently resides in Washington DC and was for 30 years the staff arranger for the President's own United States Marines Band. Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stephen Bulla to the podcast today, especially for our Christmas special this year. And we're going to be looking at one of his fine pieces, the Proclamation of Christmas. So first of all, Steve, how are you keeping?
I'm well, thanks. It seems to have gotten busier back-to-back writing commissions on this side and different performances coming up. Lots of excitement, but it doesn't seem to slow down right now. Myself, my wife, children, everyone's healthy and working from home as we normally do anyway. One of the boys is in school in person, the other one is in college, and that's all virtual. So the answer is doing well here. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's excellent to hear. So, as I said, we're going to be delving into your piece a little bit today. And before we go and look through the score like we normally do in our analyses, I've got a few contextual questions to ask you. So first of all, what was the inspiration behind writing the Proclamation of Christmas?
Yeah, we're going back to 1990 or even before that, perhaps. It was published in 1990. So I'm trying to recall, specifically, it was an ISB event. Carols at Christmas, was it Cadogan Hall or something like that? Westminster, perhaps. I don't get many requests to write music for the ISB, but on this occasion, someone contacted me and said very specifically, we're looking for like an opener for the program, for the band to come out and play something with lots of flash. But that was the specific genesis of the work.
Fantastic. And it's great. We're actually playing it as well this year in preparation for our Albert Hall concert in a few weeks as well. It's great. Comes out fresh.
Wonderful.
Still. So the overture features 5 different carols: Hark the Herald, Ding Dong Merrily on High, The First Noel, While Shepherds Watched, and Angels from the Realms of Glory, set to the tune Regent Square. What were the reasons for using these 5 particular carols?
I tried to find a theme, Matthew. It was, I have favorites. We all have favorite carols, but I had to, first of all, make it fit into the style of an overture. I'm going to go as far as saying a Broadway style overture. And so there had to be a lot of energy. There had to be contrast to the energy, some of the slower tunes like The First Noel, perhaps. But overarching that, I was trying to think about sort of a theme idea of angels and shepherds and a grand announcement. So if you take another look at that list, you'll see it's kind of portraying the announcement when the angels, appeared to the shepherds and there was a star and that the wise men followed. All of that we associate with the announcement of Christmas, of the birth of the child. And that was kind of the bigger picture, if that's what you're asking me. I tried to pick tunes that wove that together.
Excellent. Perfect tunes to announce something coming, as
Exactly.
is an overture.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the musical considerations you had to make to fit this overture genre?
Yeah. Well, my work with the Marine Band, I was always kind of putting together medleys of music, either for our vocalists or for the band to play patriotic medleys. So I'm very aware of how long it takes to get through a tune, maybe transition into a key change or whatever. The challenge was not to make the piece too long as an overture. So I had to musically kind of consider tying this all together. 5 tunes, that could get a little unwieldy unless you're really moving through them pretty quickly, yet honoring the tune, respecting the tune, making sure you're not just taking a snippet, but putting the whole tune in there, yet keeping it all a brilliant setting. So transitions had to be short. Back to the musical question, introduction kind of had to lay the foundation for what was coming, perhaps. But yeah, the main musical thing was getting it all in there and keeping it to about 6 minutes or 7 minutes or so. So that was one of the goals early on.
Fantastic. And now you alluded to it slightly earlier, but I'd just like to dig into this question a little bit more, and I'm sure we'll spot it when we look through the score. But are there any intentional nods to other composers or references to other pieces in this music?
That's an interesting question, because I guess I'm known for doing that occasionally. I'll nod to my friends. I'll say hello to Bill Himes every once in a while with a little quote, or Peter Graham, just as a wave. I say it's an interesting question because in this piece, if there are some, you're going to have to point them out to me, because I don't remember doing any references to other composers, living or otherwise. So yeah, but I don't recall. The answer is no, to my recollection.
Fair enough. And my final of these sort of contextual questions before we go into the score. Is there a particular recording or performance of this piece that is particularly meaningful to you?
Yes, of course. The original recording that I have of it, the first recording I received, was the ISB 2006 recording. It's called Christmas Tidings, the CD at that time. And I thought the band really captured it, all the excitement of it, both technically and musically. It's all there. And it opens. It's the track one of that Christmas Tidings CD. So that's my go-to. I know there's been a few others. Bands around the world send me their CDs, and but the question was, if I have a favorite, I still go back to the ISB recording. Well done.
Excellent. And I should just mention to listeners that that's a recording we're going to be using for our little snippets in our excerpt today. So let's take a look at the score and delve a little bit deeper into these sections. As usual, listeners at home can find the score and download it on the Salvation Army Music Index if they're interested to follow along with us. So we've got a very exciting opening here that captures the excitement and the mood of Christmas. Could you talk us through a few things that we should be looking out or listening out for in this introduction?
Well, percussion plays a good part. There's a big timpani roll, which is typical of an overture, and the snare drum coming through in the opening. But yeah, for bands, many bands have a kind of a hard time getting these. I'm gonna use American words here, but the 16th notes in the beginning seem to be a challenge. Just finding the right pitch. And when I rehearse it, I'll kind of give them the first note and then the second note, and have them go back and forth slowly until we have this, this sort of well, it's a very woodwind kind of passage, but a little, just to sort of set the stage and get the excitement going. After it's in the middle of the band, the horns, baritones, then as you can see, about 4 or 5 bars later, it goes into the cornets and back and forth. So we have this very high activity kind of figure in the opening. And of course, the trombones come in the third bar and start really setting up some of the theme of the fanfare in this music. But it's kind of like these tremolos that challenge bands a bit. Shouldn't, but it's just a matter of finding pitch. So that's all in the opening.
Fantastic. When we get to letter A, we have the first of our carols making an appearance. Hark the Herald Angels Sings. Could you talk us through this section and the way you've treated the melody here?
Yes. Well, of course, this great song is not normally in a fast-paced overture style setting. But what I do is set up that sort of syncopated figure about 4 bars before the tune comes in. And by the way, that's a short introduction. That's just 4 bars. It's nothing really more than that. After we've got out of the opening, it's just 4 bars to sort of set what's coming for the accompaniment to the tune. And you can see the horns and flugel and all start that in those 4 bars. But when the melody comes in the solo cornets, then it's just trombones continuing that melody in the background. I consider it a light accompaniment. You can see the tubas are just kind of touching here with like a pizzicato bass line every couple of beats or so. The main propelling component is the trombones, of course. But, I mentioned respecting the tune. You don't kind of, I'm sure some people could make a march out of Hark the Herald Angels Sing and kind of turn it around that way. But I like to put a big phrase over it and have it played legato, and that's just what's indicated for the solo cornets here. And so there's your setting of Hark the Herald.
Fantastic. And when we get to letter B, we've got throughout the band these sforzando pianos. To me, they sounded a little bit like sort of bells of Christmas ringing out. Is that an intentional sound world
Yes.
that you're trying to get out there?
Yeah, very much. Not to be obvious about it, but that's exactly what we're trying to get a carol on from the trombones and cornets there, as the euphonium and horn sections keep the tune going forward. Of interest, the chimes, I think you call them chimes, at letter B actually play the first three notes of the tune, and then same thing 4 bars later, so that 3 bars or so later. So it gives more and more of that bell carillon sound to what's going on in the music.
Fantastic. And that takes us through to section D, a change of style here as we introduce Ding Dong Merrily on High. Can you talk us through the style change and the key change, and perhaps the reasons why this movement and this section works so well?
Sure, Matthew. It's about contrast in a piece like this. You can't just keep going full on. You have to kind of balance things a bit as a writer. This writer, anyway. 2 bars before D, it's like I finally put the brakes on, and the whole thing does slow down molto rauh before the tune comes in, and so it's that this transition is just 2 bars, which gets us through the change of tempo and also the key change. So I put a fermata on that so that at the end of it, and a complete caesura, a break, so that the music has a chance to breathe before we go into Ding Dong Merrily on High. This is more of a traditional, older English tune to my recollection, and I like the style change. It has enough motion in it to keep momentum of the music moving forward, and it kind of writes itself. I have to remember that when I was working on this, the beautiful lines that are intrinsic to the way we hear this tune every time are it just kind of writes itself. So that was a pleasure working with that tune. In fact, I kept going with it. I take it into a key change. Not to move ahead of you here, but we're still on the same tune. At letter E, I go into the key of G concert, which gets into sharps for the rest of the band. And I actually, because it's a short tune, what is it, maybe 8 bars or so, I said, okay, there's time. I'd like to explore the tune a little bit more. So we have a flugel solo and a couple of other little instrumental areas where I thin down the orchestration. So in that second verse, then the band comes in and sort of finishes it in a bigger way as well. But I was able to get 2 verses through on that one through there.
Excellent. And from that sort of quite light pastiche baroque setting, perhaps, of that tune, we move into a waltz-like version of the first Noel. Can you talk us through this next section, please?
Yeah, again, it's a little bit of with a fast-paced overture. Even in Broadway shows that I've been to, you're kind of, they're introducing you to the songs that are in the show. And they don't take a lot of time. Again, I'm talking about transitions. They don't take a lot of time to get you there. So I had to come out of Ding Dong Merrily on High, slow it down once again, and the inevitable key change, which does come in at letter F. You said waltz-like. The tune originally is in 3. I wouldn't actually consider it an pa kind of a waltz. More of a ballad where I kind of go into a little bit of jazz harmony which is where I like to live when I'm able to, and just insert some of that flavor into the setting of the first Noel. It doesn't really go very far out, but I love the way some of the bass lines work with the melody, and I was able to get some of that sort of harmonization into it. That's the first part of the tune. When it gets to the chorus, I go into another, we were talking about bells, I go into another bit of a carillon at letter G for the last bit of the first Noel, where we're featuring just the cornet section as I'm looking at it. And then I answer 4 bars of that sort of cornet carillon with then another return to the lush sound of the darker instruments, the horns, baritones, euphonium with a moving quaver line through there. And then lastly, to finish the tune, we do our bell effects again. I'm sure you see those 4 bars before H, where we just slow the tune down so it spreads across a couple of measures. And again, the bell effect through each of those, each note of the end of the tune. And then the flugel puts a little jazzy thing on top at the end, and another hold with another break before the next tune is introduced. So the music breathes once again.
Fantastic. And just to go back to something that I've noticed in the score, quite unusual perhaps for brass band scores, the trombones are marked non-vibrato. What's the reasoning behind that technique there?
Oh, pretty specifically, so they don't use vibrato. Yeah, it's more about when to use vibrato and when not to. And if especially in jazz harmonization, there's no room for any kind of a wobble inside the voicing. If you're going to put something perhaps on top, the lead voice, when I'm working with a band in this kind of a setting, I would say that the melody certainly, but not from within, tight harmony. And that's why I very specifically said, don't use vibrato here. I don't write that so much anymore because bands now don't do that as much. Orchestral players, military players know not to put vibrato on in, it's sort of style dependent. So back then, back in 1990, I kind of felt like for a British brass band, I felt like I had to be a little more, less subtle about the vibrato. Long way to say it, but there you go. Thanks for pointing that out.
No, fascinating answer. That's great. So when we get to letter H here, we have perhaps one of the sort of most extended passages of transition into the music, taking us through to the Giro, which to me gives off little sort of troika vibes here with the sleigh bells chiming throughout to set us up for while shepherds watch their flock.
Well, good observation. Some of this, when I write, it's more instinctual than I'm not going to a Prokofiev score and saying, oh, troika right through here would be, but unconsciously, I think I was channeling that. It's good that you brought it up. An interesting observation I had when this first came out, I was told that song was not well known in the UK. It's very well known here in America, and it seemed, again, my idea about the shepherds and that whole scene of announcing the birth, that this tune fit in very, very well there. So it also gives me a chance, if I can anticipate your next question, to move the melody down to another part of the band at letter J. And in fact, it's just the tubas playing the melody in octaves there, with now the trombone section in cut mutes, just to give it another color and to give the tubas the front of the sound picture, as it were, through there.
So that takes us through into another transition into section K, where we have our fifth and final carol, Angels from the Realms of Glory, set to the tune Regent Square. Can you talk us through, again, this transition here and the treatment of this final carol?
Yeah, I love this tune. I felt I saved it for the end because it has such a majesty about it. I think, of course, I gave it to the trombones, and all playing unison. It was in a good range. Sits well for them. About the fourth bar of K, the cornets, the solo cornets come in, and that's in terms of Broadway writing and that style. That's a violin line right there as they are leading in with all the consecutive 16th notes into the next section, which is a key change, handing it over to the euphonium, but the tune keeps going through there as in the quarter notes, and it gets us up to letter L, where I sort of break the tune down into a halftime feel instead of come and worship. It's so each beat kind of stretches out the tune a little bit. Yet the snare drum and the percussion are still cranking away there with the rhythm that propels the music forward. At letter L also, while they're doing that, I have another string line kind of going over the top, sustaining for interest up above the melody, which is still in the horns. Another one of those sort of orchestral moves before M is in the euphonium. Again, a big long line, something that would appear in a violin part. And that is all part of kind of what I was emulating in the style of the music. Gets a little faster as it leads into letter M. What are your thoughts about letter M, Matthew?
Oh, delightful as ever, and I think we have a little return to this opening motif that we've seen. I think it is fairly obvious, but I think it's possibly worth sort of talking. Where does the derivative of this little 3-4-2-4 melody come from?
Yeah, it does appear earlier as well, but it was just, I think it was kind of a motif that I came up with to sort of tie things together, and it keeps you on that when you do a 3-4-2-4 back and forth like this. It kind of keeps you a little, I don't want to say unbalanced, but on the edge of your chair of like what's coming. It's just kind of unsettling, perhaps in a simplistic way, I suppose. But that's what we're trying to establish there. And if the quarter note's at 144, so the tempo is really moving along here with excitement. And it just gave me a chance to do a little bit more with that mixed meter section as you kind of come up to the final statement before letter N, 3 bars before.
And so certainly an exciting finish here. The music drops, and again, I'm sure you might say to give it a little bit of space before we take us through to this bold ending. Can you talk us through our final section, letter N, the presto?
Yes, absolutely. That continues with the mixed meter for a little bit, but we drop down, as you say, and everything is, I feel like, especially with scoring for brass band, you need the dynamic contrast. It is so critical to making it a variety to the sound, the color of the instruments, as opposed to just everything being loud all the way through. And so I've work with every piece I write. I work on ways to find that dynamic range and make it build it into the orchestration rather than just writing piano or fortissimo, but building it into the weight of the instruments. So we have some of that at letter N here, marked presto. We go right down to the tubas that are setting up what is basically a sequence that continues every 2 bars or so. You can see it starts in the tubas, then in the trombones, second baritone, goes on up into the horns, then up into the cornets. That's really that whole page of score right there. It just keeps building, repeating like an ostinato of what's going through that rhythm. I'm using chordal harmony here. I'm building up in fourths, not so much in thirds, but that kind of, if you follow that along, you can see it right through. Every 2 bars, it goes up a fourth or so. And then we get into the final what would you call this? I guess a fanfare. It's trombones and cornets with flourishes in the euphonium and tuba down below. But it's this sort of final fanfare before we put the rallentando on at the end. Everything draws out, and then another big line up into the high woodwinds and high violins. Perhaps it's in here. It's the cornets in the entire cornet section leading up to their ultimate sustained note. The whole band answers them with the two quavers. And then, of course, we have a soprano note on top for the last on his high C, or her high C, with the timpani helping join in. And it really gives that final full stop, on the setting.
An absolutely scintillating finish, and I must say masterfully written all the way through the piece.
Thank you.
Now, thank you ever so much, Steve, for joining us. It's been a real privilege to talk to you, and I really hope that we'll be able to speak to you again in the future a little bit more about your life as well as the music.